Fellas, how in the hell are we doing here today?
I was trying to find a good way to kick off the new year.
And what better way than a brand new, definitive, 100% the right way, no questions asked, boss tier list video. Now it's been a few months since our last boss tier list video, and that's mainly because there hasn't been many new Souls-likes since Black Myth Wukong, at least that I know about. 2025 will have some new bangers for sure, but in the meantime, I thought I'd go back and play an older game that I found called Kena: Bridge of Spirits. It came out a few years ago, but man, this game was amazing. I had a great time playing it. Before we jump into things, I do just want to mention that this game is played as a linear experience, but that doesn't mean the bosses progressively get harder. There's still some outliers that mix the list up a little bit. The game also has a difficulty slider, and for this playthrough, I played on the highest difficulty available because I'm not a small child. We'll save all that kind of talk for the review, but for now, let's just jump straight into things with Kena: Bridge of Spirits, all bosses ranked easiest to hardest. Kicking things off here at number 16, the easiest boss we have is Sprout. Now Sprout is the very first boss you encounter in the game, and this battle acts as the end of the tutorial to practice all of the controls and abilities you just learned. While he's a red bar boss this early in the game, this guy is actually just a normal mob that you end up fighting a million other times throughout the course of your playthrough. You don't have your full kit to use yet in this fight, but I'd still say this is actually the easiest encounter you have with Sprout, because every other time you're either fighting 2 to 3 of them, and he has a bunch of different smaller mobs around him, which takes extra time and draws the camera lock away. In terms of actual attacks, he doesn't really do a whole lot at all. It felt like I had him stun locked for most of the fight, and he wasn't able to swing much. When he does attack, it's all melee, and his swings are super slow with small combos. Next at number 15, we have Kappa. Now this is the very next fight after Sprout, but it was almost easier than Sprout, I'm not gonna lie. The boss himself just jumps between 3 poison puddles, and you have to guess where he's gonna pop up, but I swear, he couldn't really do anything because of how long it would take him. Most of the time I was able to stun lock him before his animation even finished, so he couldn't even get a chance to attack. The only reason Kappa does get a boost above Sprout is because he has huge AoE attacks that Sprout didn't, and Kappa spawns other random enemies to help him. Next at number 14, we have the Warrior. Now this guy, for being this late in the game, was an absolute pushover. That's all I can really say. The only reason he gets a boost above the other guys is because he's not a normal mob, he's an actual boss, but this guy couldn't do anything the entire time. At least the 2 first entries actually made me work for it. I know I've used the word stun lock a lot already, but this entire fight, this dude legitimately could not touch me, and he was just taking it. Most other bosses have a shield or some sort of dodge that would help them get out of situations like this, but this guy just took it the entire time. I will say he did attempt to jump backwards a few times, but it wasn't far enough at all. I honestly didn't even really get to see all of his attacks or abilities because the fight was just over so quick. He could not touch me. Next at number 13, we have the Rot Eater. Now this was actually a really interesting fight. Throughout the game, your little rot minions turn into a giant spirit slug that you use to clear areas of the map, but this time you're using the slug to fight another slug, and it's really cool. This mechanic is optional, you don't have to use it, but this is without a doubt the best way to complete this fight, and it wouldn't have been as fun without the slug. Besides just the fun aspect though, with your rot minions standing in front of you, you never really take a whole lot of damage, and with their attacks, they also deal a considerable amount of damage. The actual boss himself is pretty slow moving and doesn't really have many attacks at all. All he mainly does is spawn other bugs to fight and sends out these giant energy orbs at you. And I will say, if he does hit you, he actually deals some decent damage, but overall he's really slow and all of his attacks are easily anticipated. Next up at number 12, we have Mage. This is another enemy you'll run into quite a bit throughout the game, but once again, this is certainly the easiest fight you'll have with this guy. In terms of his abilities, kinda like the Rot Eater, his main attacks come from spawning other smaller enemies, and he sends out this giant energy orb that tracks to your position. This guy seems to be the only boss in the game that's actually able to heal himself with an ability, so you can't let this fight drag on or he's just going to beat you off your stamina. I will say though, his heal animation is pretty long, so whenever you see him working up into it, you should try to prioritize a heavy hit to try to knock him out of it. Next up at number 11, we have Wood Knight. Now this was actually the first boss on the list that gave us a death on the old counter. This fight is actually preceded by smaller enemies too, so you have to not take damage from them, so you have max health for the actual boss. This is another enemy you fight a bunch of times after this, and he's equally annoying in all encounters. He has various range and melee attacks with 2 to 3 swing combos and decent speed. Besides just his attacks, he also has a shield that he uses to block some of yours. And if you get close enough to him when he's just sitting there on the ground shielded, he'll spring out of it for a 2 swing combo. He also doesn't let you get far to use your bow at all. He closes the gaps pretty fast and stays on you for most of the fight. Next at our top number 10 on the list, we have Sprout Captain. This guy wastes no time at all and immediately starts out with a lunging 3-swing combo and keeps up that pace pretty much the whole fight. This is once again another mob we fight pretty nonchalantly later on all the time, but this fight actually threw me off for a sec. This guy was actually quite a jump in speed from the rest at this point in the game. Another thing that makes this a bit harder than the rest is that there's no health around the arena you're fighting in, so you just have to make do with what you have, and he's easily 3-4 shotting me. Next at our top number 9, we have Shrine Guardian. Up to this point in the game, this was the most hectic fight I had been in. This guy constantly spawns other smaller enemies to help him fight that kept dragging the camera all over the place. The actual boss himself also has various ranged or close multi-combo attacks, including some that have AoE damage that restricts the map. Something that helps out a bunch in this fight though is the amount of courage he drops, and he has a giant spore on his back that can be destroyed for a huge chunk of damage. Next at our top number 8, we have Stone Guardian. Now this is pretty much the exact same as the Shrine Guardian, except this guy gets a bump because he's covered in stone armor, which forces you to fight a particular way by using the new Spirit Bomb you just unlocked. Like the last fight, this guy also has various smaller enemies spawning in to help him, and he has various close or range attacks like melee combos or throwing a rock. Besides the armor though, these fights are pretty much identical.
Same, but different. But still same.
Next at our top number 7, we have Vine Knight. This fight is actually the exact same as the Wood Knight, except now he's got vines. And I will say, this fight was actually pretty crazy at first. This boss fight is preceded by a bunch of suicide bomber enemies and a sprout. Then when you actually get to the Vine Knight, he's actually pretty strong. He can use his vines to swipe or pound the ground, and he can pick you up and slam you down. He gets a lot of use out of those bad boys. Like the last 2 entries, the Vine Knight and the Wood Knight are pretty much the exact same fight, except he gets a buff because of the vines. Next at our top number 6, we have Corrupt Tarot. This is the first Corrupt fight we have on our list, but more are coming up here pretty soon. All of these Corrupt fights act as an end to a major point in the story, and this one is after the first third of the story. This guy has fairly long combos with varying speeds of attack to keep you guessing on the dodge or parry timing. He also has a lightning fast lunge attack that he does from any range, so you can't ever really get a comfortable space away from him. I also do just want to mention that up until this point of the game, this was the only fight for me that had a pretty noticeable amount of lag mid-fight because there was just so much happening on screen. This wasn't a big deal at all for most of the game. It only happened for like 2 fights, and it might not have even happened for you at all, but it felt worth mentioning, because it definitely made things harder. Next to our top number 5 hardest boss has to be the Hunter. Right off the rip, this fight is mainly just tedious. This guy spends 98% of his time flying around in the air, so you have to use your bow, and he's sporadically zigzagging around, so it's hard to line up a shot. This fight is actually just a game of patience more than anything. You have to not get cocky and chase extra damage, or you're going to end up getting punished. In terms of attacks, Hunter has various different bow shots, whether it's a rapid fire barrage of arrows, one direct high powered shot, or a giant bomb that covers the whole map. He can also swoop down and hit you mid-flight, and it's really hard to tell when he's going to use that, so it has a really small dodge window. Also, if you get hit, it takes about 3 or 4 hits to kill you, depending on what attack lands. But I will say, this fight has 3 heals, which is some of the most in any boss room, so that's definitely a plus. Next at our top, number 4, we have Mask Maker. Now this guy isn't necessarily the fastest, but he makes up for it by constantly teleporting around the arena, so you never really know where he's going to attack from. He has 3 swing combos where he mixes in a teleport mid-combo, and always ends up behind you. This guy is also the only boss I can think of so far with some sort of elemental damage. Mask Maker had frost damage he uses, whether it's ranged or melee, and he also spawns in little frost minions to help him fight. This was a fight that looked like it was going to be pretty easy like the Warrior, but unlike the Warrior, Mask Maker doesn't let you stun lock him into oblivion. He actually has ways of getting out of it, and he just doesn't flinch in general. So it was actually a really good fight. Next at our top, number 3, we have Corrupt Toshi. This is the second to last fight in the game, and this guy is certainly no pushover at all. This was probably my most favorite boss battle of the game, honestly. It's a great stand-up fight. He has almost any attack you can think of at his disposal. Multi-swing combos, various range attacks, AoE attacks, he teleports around the arena, and he also has a pretty effective block he uses to counter most of your bow attacks, and some melee ones too. The only reason this fight isn't higher is because it didn't really feel hectic or crazy at all. It's just you, Toshi, and nothing else. Mind you, he is pretty fast, but not having other things to worry about like other minions or a particular way of fighting it made it almost way too easy to focus on what you gotta do for this fight. But even with that being said, this was still way harder than all the other previous fights on the list, even the ones with smaller enemies or other stuff going on. Next at our top, number 2, we have Corrupt Woodsmith. Now this is another one of our corrupt friends, and some of you might be confused that this fight is harder with it being a lot earlier in the story, but this fight actually felt insane with the amount of stuff this guy's throwing at you. For starters, you can't even damage the boss until you break a stone shield in the middle of the arena, and when you actually can attack him, the time window is extremely small. Once the fight really starts going too, he spawns a bunch of smaller enemies to help him out, and the map quickly gets filled with a ton of radial AoE damage that appears all over the space, which forces you to constantly move around. The AoE damage attacks are easily the biggest problem with the entire fight, because while you're dealing with that, you still have to worry about the actual boss himself, who's actually incredibly fast with close or ranged attacks. This is also one of the only fights with a completely separate attack phase, where the boss changes up how he fights, but I will say, it happens midway through his health bar, so it's not like an entirely new health phase you have to deal with. Compared to our last entry, Toshi was certainly a harder straight up fight, but this battle just had so much more going on that you never got a second to breathe. And I personally found it a little harder. And finally folks, here at our top number 1 hardest fight, it's probably no surprise, but that's going to be the Corrupt Rock God. Now this is the last fight of the game, and it plays out as an entire sequence with multiple stages. The first part of the fight, you have to hit specific spots on his body to deal damage, and you're unable to heal at all. Then you have to fight random smaller enemies, another cycle of hitting specific spots, a parkour sequence, and then finally the end of the fight. The end of this fight was really the hardest part of the entire thing. For starters, it took me a while to even figure out how to deal damage in this phase. This was easily where I got most of my deaths. And while you're doing that, you have to dodge a ton of smaller enemies, multiple consecutive and AoE attacks from the boss, and immense amounts of lag. Maybe this was just something that happened for me since I'm on PC, but this final part of the fight had an insane amount of lag with all of the various abilities being thrown out. The overall boss himself moves pretty slow, but his hits deal some punishing damage if he's able to scoop you up and hit you with the ground pound.
If this fight didn't have a million other things going on and it was just the Rock God, it probably would have been rated a bit lower, but it takes the cake as number 1 just for the pure insanity of it. This was the only fight in the game that had me like, oh, hold up, let me lock in real quick.
And with that being said, folks, I think that's gonna about do it here for our list today. This is a series that I really like doing on the channel, and I'll be honest, I haven't done the best job in the past. There have been lists in the past where I was extremely confident I found all the bosses, but I ended up missing something somewhere along the way, and we just can't let that happen anymore. Going forward, I'm not posting one of these unless I'm 110% positive we're not leaving anything unaccounted for. And overall, I just want to increase the quality of these videos. I want this to be a really good, well-edited, well-spoken video, so we're going to try to get better with that. So this is the start of a new lunar, okay? We're going to try to clean things up around here to deliver the most definitive, 100% the right way list as possible. Just stick with me, folks, you know what I'm saying? We're still new to this whole thing. We're still starting out, but we're getting there. I feel like each video you see improvement, you see something get a little better, and who knows how this thing will be looking in a year or two. We just gotta get there. If there's any changes you would have made to this list, go ahead and leave them down in the comments because I'd love to hear about it. Also, if you enjoyed the video, please make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more content like this. Appreciate your time, everybody. Take it easy. This has been Lunar, and welcome to Bound.